Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. You're joining me here today on board a Class 390 heading towards Birmingham New Street. Why, you might ask? The West Midlands has a multitude of transport proposals in the pipeline, whether it be the extension of the Midland Metro to Brierley Hill, or the reopening of stations at Darlaston and Willenhall. But with the population of the West Midlands growing by just under a percentage point annually, and with the strain already on the road network and existing public transport systems, you could argue that any proposals put forward really should be pursued at this time. But in this video, we'll be discussing a project which has been under construction for the last couple of years and is due to reopen towards the end of 2025. The project in question is none other than the Camp Hill line, a 7-mile long railway between Birmingham and Kings Norton which stretches through vast swathes of Birmingham suburbia. Therefore, in this video, I will be discussing what the Camp Hill line project is and why the project is being pursued. I'll have a look at the history of the Camp Hill line and take a look at the areas that the railway is going to serve, as well as exploring alternative proposals which have been put forward and discuss any positives or negatives associated with the project to determine whether or not this project will prove to be a success. If you like this video, do make sure to give this video a like, subscribe to my channel and share this video. Doing these three things always helps me out and I really appreciate you doing so. Now, without further ado, let's jump into the video. So what is the Camp Hill line? The Camp Hill line is a 7-mile long railway line that stretches between Kings Norton in southern Birmingham and Birmingham New Street, passing through suburbs such as Highgate, Balsall Heath, Mosley, Kings Heath and Sturchley. Since 1941, the Camp Hill line has seen no stations open to passengers and has instead been used by cross-country services travelling between Manchester Piccadilly and Bristol Temple Meads, and freight services looking to circumvent Birmingham New Street. The line is largely seen as one that is underused, which has led to an assortment of suggestions being made by local authorities and transport planners as to how the line could better serve communities which currently do not see a railway service, but would more than likely benefit from being served by one. This led to West Midlands Trains and the Mayor of West Midlands, Andy Street, pledging in 2017 that the Camp Hill line would see passenger services reinstated by 2020, as part of a £1 billion investment programme into upgrading and improving the railway infrastructure in and around the West Midlands. The plans associated with the Camp Hill line include a half-hourly service between Birmingham New Street and Kings Norton using diesel multiple units, with stations opened at Mosley Village, Kings Heath and Pineapple Road, before terminating at Kings Norton where the Camp Hill line and existing cross-city line services will meet. These services are set to drastically reduce journey times between Birmingham city centre and the surrounding suburbs, with Mosley to Birmingham to be cut to just 8 minutes between the two, whilst Kings Heath and Pineapple Road will only be 11 and 14 minutes from Birmingham city centre respectively, illustrating that these reductions in journey times will prove immensely popular with the travelling public compared to the existing public transport methods which serve these areas. But in order for us to get a feel of how stations reopening along the Camp Hill line will benefit these areas, I think it would be worth taking a look at the history of the Camp Hill line. So here goes. Most of what we know now as the Camp Hill line was opened on the 10th of December 1840 by the Birmingham and Gloucester Railway as part of an extension from Gloucester towards a temporary terminus in Birmingham known as Camp Hill. Stations initially opened at Kings Norton, Lifford, Mosley and Camp Hill, but the temporary terminus at Camp Hill was later cast aside in favour of an extension through to Curzon Street, which opened in August 1841. Camp Hill was largely seen as an inconvenient terminus for those wishing to travel into Birmingham, whereas Curzon Street was widely regarded as being the major rail terminal for services into Birmingham at the time. Although services from the Birmingham and Gloucester Railway to Birmingham Curzon Street were short-lived in the grand scheme of things, and services were later diverted to the newly opened Birmingham New Street in 1854. The diversion of services using the Camp Hill line into Curzon Street and later New Street set the tone for improvements that was soon to follow, with the Camp Hill line's immediate future being more centred around the addition of chords and curves rather than more stations. This was evident when a chord was added from the Birmingham to Oxford line onto the Camp Hill line near Bawdsley in 1861, and a line was also constructed directly between Landor Street and St Andrews junctions, for services to travel from the Camp Hill line onto the Midland Railway towards Derby. The creation of a direct railway between the two junctions proved to be operationally beneficial for the Midland Railway, as it negated the need for express services trudging between Derby and Bristol to reverse at Birmingham New Street, where carriages specifically bound from New Street could instead detach at Camp Hill. These Camp Hill detachments didn't last for particularly long though, and services didn't need to reverse at Birmingham New Street. But how was this made possible? In short, the Birmingham West Suburban Railway Act was passed through Parliament in 1871, an act that envisioned a second railway being built between Birmingham and Kings Norton through largely underdeveloped areas that were looking ripe for local developers to begin developing in. The construction of the line was swift, and subsequently, the line opened in 1876, with stations opening at Sturchley Street, Selly Oak and Bournebrook, Somerset Road, Church Road, and Granville Street. For those who were wishing to travel into Birmingham New Street from Kings Norton, this railway was seen as a little useless, as it meant that for passengers heading towards New Street or any of the other Birmingham terminals, they needed to disembark at Granville Street and walk into the city centre, unlike the Camp Hill line that took passengers directly to New Street from Kings Norton. Therefore, the terminus at Granville Street was closed in 1885, and a direct connection to Birmingham New Street was installed. This led to a sharp decline in the number of express services using the Camp Hill line, with many express services subsequently diverted onto the Birmingham West Suburban Railway instead. For quite some time now, the Camp Hill line had been more centred around suburban journeys and journeys in and out of Birmingham New Street, and this was evident when stations were opened at Mosley in 1867 and Brighton Road in 1875. However, now that there were more express services using the Birmingham West Suburban Railway and fewer using the Camp Hill line, the Midland Railway opted to capitalise on more local demand by opening a station at Hazelwell in 1903. However, the Camp Hill line faced formidable competition on this front as the Birmingham Central Tramways opened their very own steam tramway between Kings Heath and Birmingham City Centre in 1887. This tramway largely paralleled the Camp Hill line between the two destinations, serving Mosley and Balsall Heath along the way. But the Midland Railway needn't have feared, as a curve was later installed between the Camp Hill line and the Birmingham West Suburban Railway in 1892, which enabled circular services to operate to and from Birmingham New Street, in a similar fashion to circular services operated by South Western Railway around southwestern London, for example. Things soon went quiet for the Camp Hill line, and there were very few developments bar the odd name change for the first half of the 20th century. But on the 27th of January 1941, as was commonplace across much of the UK rail network at the time, wartime rationalisations led to passenger services coming to an end and every station along the Camp Hill line closed. But likely unbeknownst to the communities once served by the Camp Hill line, these areas would not see passenger services again for well over 80 years. This was not helped by Birmingham Corporation Tramways ripping up their tramway between Kings Heath and Birmingham City Centre in 1949, and so it has left areas served by the Camp Hill line increasingly reliant on alternative methods of transport. This has meant that for the last 80 or so years, areas once served by the Camp Hill line have become hotspots for congestion and have required large swathes of bus capacity to be supplied as a way of satisfying the demand of public transport in these areas. But we'll now take a look at the areas that stations are to be rebuilt in, and to see how each of these areas will benefit from stations reopening in them. So here goes. We'll begin at Birmingham New Street, the station in Birmingham City Centre that Camp Hill line services are due to terminate at. Located slap bang in the middle of the UK's third largest city, Birmingham New Street is seen as the gateway to Birmingham City Centre, credited as being the commercial, financial and social centre of the Midlands. Once a historical market town during the medieval period, Birmingham began to rapidly grow during the Industrial Revolution as advances in technologies were made. I mean, in the 18th century alone, Birmingham saw the establishment of Lloyd's Bank, the construction of the first copper mill, and the development of the steam engine. Pretty crazy, right? But present-day Birmingham as it stands, while it might be a far cry from its industrial roots, its economy has diversified into becoming more centred around a variety of industries, including the services industry, the manufacturing industry, retail and education. As soon as you leave Birmingham New Street Station, you are greeted by two of Birmingham's major shopping centres, Bullring and Grand Central, both of which are home to over 200 stores between them, making Birmingham an excellent place to shop and socialise, within such close remit to one of the country's largest public transport hubs too. As for manufacturing in the city proves to be rather strong on this front, given the city's manufacturing output includes products such as chemicals, plastic and food. But there are also more high-end and luxury goods produced in and around Birmingham, including Jaguars in Castle Bromwich and the infamous Jewellery Quarter, where 1/3 of jewellery in the UK is manufactured. These industries are all tied together nicely by the excellent public transport system in and around Birmingham city centre, and Birmingham New Street is evidently the star of the show. Birmingham New Street recorded 35 million passenger entries and exits between April 2023 and March 2024, making it the busiest railway station outside of London across the UK. New Street has easily been the major transport hub of the West Midlands since opening all the way back in 1854, and the sheer volume of passengers and train services passing through the station only verifies that claim. It almost feels as if you have a train to every nook and cranny of the country from Birmingham New Street, whether it is a cross-country service heading towards Paignton or Penzance, an Avanti West Coast service towards Glasgow or Edinburgh, or a Transport for Wales service towards Aberystwyth or Holyhead. But Birmingham New Street is equally credited as having an exceptional local public transport network, both from the station and within the surrounding areas. From Birmingham New Street, you have West Midlands Railway services towards the University of Birmingham, Four Oaks and Lichfield along the frequent cross-city line, and services down the West Coast Main Line towards Stetchford and Birmingham International. If you leave the station concourse and head out onto Stevenson Street, you are able to change onto the West Midlands Metro for destinations towards Edgbaston Village, West Bromwich and Wolverhampton. But if you take a walk along Smallbrook Queensway towards Birmingham Moor Street Station, not only are you able to catch Chiltern Railways and West Midlands Railway services towards Warwick, Kidderminster and Stratford-upon-Avon from Birmingham Moor Street, but you are also able to change onto an assortment of bus services which stretch to all parts of the West Midlands region. Some of these bus services include more local ones such as the 3 towards Yardley Wood and the 61 towards Frankley. But these services are complemented by longer distance services that link Birmingham to areas further afield, including the 997 towards Walsall, the X4 and X5 towards Sutton Coldfield, and the X51 towards Cannock. So from this analysis, I think it would be wise to suggest that communities along the Camp Hill line would benefit from faster rail services into Birmingham New Street, given the number of onward transport connections available from the areas surrounding the station, and the reduction in journey times for those travelling into Birmingham for leisure and employment purposes. I think we can conclude that services terminating at Birmingham New Street is a sensible idea for the time being, so let's move on to the first new station to reopen along the Camp Hill line, which is none other than Mosley Village. We've now arrived in Mosley, where we will be visiting the first station on the Camp Hill line to reopen, which is Mosley Village. Located just off the Ulster Road on St Mary's Row, Mosley Village is due to be built atop the old site of Mosley Station. Opening in 1867, Mosley was constructed in a deep cutting beneath St Mary's Church, which stifled noise pollution caused by the trains passing through the station, but with hindsight, this wasn't a particularly good idea, but we'll be touching on why that is later in the video. The construction of a station in Mosley stimulated rapid house building in the area, turning the once rural village into a swanky suburb by the start of the 20th century. The area was dominated by Edwardian-style properties that were notoriously tiresome and expensive to maintain, so housing built in this style was usually accompanied by servants, to aid mothers who stayed home to do the housework and raise a family. But once the Second World War hit, the properties were deemed too costly to operate as individual units, and subsequently some of these properties were carved up into smaller flats to house workers who moved out of the war-torn Birmingham city centre. But as well as being a magnet for those wishing to live in the suburbs surrounding Birmingham post-war, Mosley has equally been a magnet for the rich and famous, with figures such as Neville Chamberlain and J.R. Tolkien calling the area their home in the early to mid-20th century. But the area notoriously gave rise to 1990s Britpop band Ocean Colour Scene, who named their most successful album after the area, so there's that I suppose. Mosley is well renowned for being a hub for nightlife and dining, with many bars and cafes located up and down the high street. Amenities-wise, Mosley Hall is a community hospital built inside the grounds of the old Grade II listed Mosley Hall, and has been serving the community since 1891. The hospital offers specialist care for those who have suffered from brain injuries or strokes, and so the Camp Hill line will undoubtedly improve access to and from the hospital for those either receiving or visiting those receiving treatment. As for the existing public transport network in Mosley, there is a solid bus network from the area to all different corners of the city. Mosley is served by the 35 between Hawksley and Birmingham city centre, alongside the ultra-frequent 50 between Druids Heath and Birmingham city centre, and you've also got the one that links Mosley with Acock's Green and Edgbaston, perfect for those wishing to catch a train from Acock's Green without needing to travel into Birmingham Snow Hill, and is good for those wishing to make orbital journeys, rather than radial ones. Therefore, I think it would be right to suggest that Mosley is going to benefit from a station being established in the area, as it will not only enable journeys from Birmingham New Street to Mosley Village to be made in under 10 minutes, but makes the area more accessible to those travelling from outside the area, and has the potential to enable a modal shift from bus services such as the frequent 35 and 50 onto the faster railway services from Mosley Village. Anyway, that's enough I think about Mosley, so let's move on to King's Heath. We've now arrived at the second station to be reopened along the Camp Hill line, which is King's Heath. King's Heath is an area home to 20,000 people known for being, as is the case with neighbouring Mosley, one of the more upmarket areas surrounding Birmingham, and so opening a station in the area will undoubtedly be appealing to those looking to move into the area from elsewhere. But what benefits would reopening a station in King's Heath bring about in the local area? If we cast our minds back to the 18th century, the area was largely rural farmland, with seldom any housing. However, the area came into the fold once improvements were made to the present-day Ulster Road, which acted as a catalyst for a number of areas to begin developing along the road. But it was in 1840 when a railway station was first opened in King's Heath, on the Birmingham and Gloucester Railway, which transformed the area into becoming an optimal suburb to live in for those wishing to commute into Birmingham. The station opened with the name Mosley, but this was later rectified with the opening of the previously discussed Mosley station further upline in 1867, from which the first Mosley station was renamed to just King's Heath. King's Heath went on to serve passengers for just over 70 years under that name, until the station closed in 1941, although the station did see use as a goods station well into the 1960s, bucking the trend of most of the other stations along the Camp Hill line. However, the present-day King's Heath is a far cry from the King's Heath of the 1940s, and the area has new issues to contend with that were not as profound as they were when the station was last opened. King's Heath, as areas go, has a brilliant local high street, with an array of local businesses and shops which make the area an excellent place to visit for leisure purposes, with one such example being the Hare and Hounds pub, well renowned for being the first venue which reggae band UB40 played in live. The area is also home to a monthly's farmers market, which is hosted in what is arguably the centrepiece of the local area, being the public square just outside of All Saints Church, and thus makes for a nice place to congregate with other people in the local area. Therefore, by opening a railway station in King's Heath, it will not only become much quicker to reach from elsewhere in Birmingham, but the reopening of the railway station will aid local businesses and will be useful in aiding the completion of journeys to and from the area for leisure purposes. Furthermore, as is the case with Mosley, King's Heath is served by the 50 which travels between Druids Heath and Birmingham New Street, and so a key benefit for those living in King's Heath who are looking to travel into Birmingham is that journey times will now be a great deal quicker with the Camp Hill line, rather than trundling along the 50 up the Ulster Road. But when it comes to transport links in King's Heath has excellent east to west transport links. The area is served by the Outer Circle 11A and 11C that link King's Heath up to the neighbouring suburbs of Acocks Green and Stetchford. Now, I think it would be an accurate assessment to suggest that the 19,000 residents who live in King's Heath will benefit from a railway station reopening in the area. This is because the West Midlands Rail Executive forecast that journey times could fall by up to 24 minutes when heading into Birmingham city centre, and so this will be key in reducing congestion along the Ulster Road, as services along the Camp Hill line could prove to be a formidable opponent to bus routes such as the 35 and 50, but more importantly, will also reduce the number of cars using the road during rush hour. Anyway, I reckon that's enough about King's Heath, so now let's move on to Pineapple Road. We've now arrived at Pineapple Road, the third station due to reopen along the Camp Hill line. Now, I can't say I'm exactly a mind reader, it's certainly not my forte, but you might be wondering why the station is going to be named Pineapple Road. The names assigned to 2 of the 3 stations set to reopen along the Camp Hill line were determined by local residents in a series of polls conducted by Transport for West Midlands. The 3 names pitched for Pineapple Road were Sturchley, Hazelwell and Pineapple Road, and for Mosley Village it was simply Mosley or Mosley Village. So you can kind of see why the residents chose to go with Pineapple Road, as it's easily the coolest of the 3 names. But let's turn our attention back to Pineapple Road. The station is set to be built atop the former site of Hazelwell Station on Cartland Road, just to the east of the suburb of Sturchley. Sturchley is an area that dates back to the 7th century, evidenced by burnt mounds found in the River Ray that are synonymous with the era, but the area didn't truly come into the fold until the 18th century, following the construction of the 29-mile-long Birmingham to Worcester Canal. The canal stretches from the Gas Street Basin in the centre of Birmingham to an offshoot of the River Severn in Worcester, with a cool intermediate guillotine lock mechanism when the canal passes through Kings Norton, the next area which we will be taking a look at. The canal was vital in ensuring that Sturchley and the surrounding areas were able to start industrialising, as the canal allowed goods to be transported from factories to all over the country, and one company that was able to really exploit how useful the Birmingham and Worcester Canal was none other than Cadbury's, who opted to construct their Bourneville factory just off the canal. Now, when it comes to the name Bourneville, it more than likely rings a bell if you're a railway enthusiast or live in Sturchley, as the name Bourneville is also the name of a station on the Cross City line. You could argue that Bourneville is more conveniently located than Pineapple Road, given it is much closer to the hustle and bustle of Sturchley's High Street, but I'd argue a key benefit to the location of Pineapple Road is that the site is immersed into a largely residential area, and so will prove useful for those wishing to commute into the city centre. But the close proximity to Bourneville could also prove beneficial to Pineapple Road, as since the coronavirus pandemic, there have been fewer trains every hour from Bourneville towards Birmingham and beyond. The Cross City line saw a reduction in frequency from 6 trains an hour to 4, and so 2 trains an hour from Pineapple Road may mean more people opting to use the Camp Hill line for shorter trips into the city centre, especially if they would otherwise miss a train from Bourneville, meaning there would be more free seats on board Cross City line trains for those travelling across Birmingham. But what alternative methods of public transport are available from Pineapple Road? As after all, any journeys from the station should be as environmentally friendly as possible. Similar to King's Heath, the area is served by outer circle routes 11A and 11C, as well as the 35 towards Hawksley and Birmingham city centre. But the area is also served by the 27, which links up Pineapple Road with Frankley and Shirley on a half-hourly frequency. I reckon Pineapple Road will prove beneficial to those living in Sturchley, given the area will see an uplift in the frequency of railway services towards Birmingham, and journey times between Birmingham New Street and Pineapple Road are projected to be cut by up to half an hour, representing a substantial decrease in journey times for those travelling to and from the area. Anyway, I reckon that's enough about Pineapple Road for now, and so let's move on to the final station that will be served by services traversing the Camp Hill line, which is Kings Norton. We've now arrived at the final station that we'll be reviewing in this video, which is none other than Kings Norton. Kings Norton is the station where the Camp Hill line services are due to terminate, and where the Camp Hill line is due to meet existing Cross City line services. Opening back in 1849 is the second station to be located in the area. Kings Norton is now one of the longest open stations to be served by Cross City line trains to this day. A number of improvements were made to the station during the 19th century, which included the extension of platforms in 1892 and the construction of a goods yard next to the station for use by the local glass-making factory Triplex. Further improvements were made to the station during the 20th century, which included the opening of 2 extra platforms during the mid-1920s, the refurbishment of the station in 1978 and the electrification of the Cross City line in 1993. The plans that have been put forward for Camp Hill line services terminating at Kings Norton indicate that services will use platform 4 in the station to unload and reload passengers, before heading back to Birmingham New Street. However, there are a pair of unused platforms situated in the centre of the station. These platforms are numbered 2 and 3, and there are wider ambitions for these 2 platforms to be reopened to passenger use over the long term, in which Camp Hill line services would use platform 3 to terminate rather than platform 4, so hopefully this ends up being pursued in the not too distant future. I think I should now briefly discuss the area surrounding Kings Norton Station, so here goes. When you leave the station, you encounter Pershaw Road South, which if you follow towards Cotteridge, you'll soon reach the shopping area within Kings Norton, which has a decent selection of convenience stores, chain stores, and places to eat. But if you head down Pershaw Road South towards Longbridge, eventually you'll stumble upon a cute range of pubs for a drink, a nice selection of restaurants, but also a fair few places to go for a walk, such as around the Green, through Kings Norton Park just off Pershaw Road South, or around the 13th century St Nicholas Church. I'd argue that one of Kings Norton's strengths as an area is the wealth of public transport connections in the area, making the area a great place to change between different methods of public transport. From Kings Norton, passengers are able to change onto Cross City line services towards Longbridge, Alve Church, Redditch and Bromsgrove when heading southward, but are also able to change for cross-city line services heading northwards towards the University of Birmingham. There's also a fair few bus services which can be caught from the area to elsewhere in Birmingham, which includes bus services such as the 18 towards Bartley Green and Warstock, and the 45 towards Birmingham and Rednall. Anyway, it's safe to say that Kings Norton will probably benefit from being served by Camp Hill line services, given the wealth of transport connections available from the wider area and the increased frequency of railway services towards the centre of Birmingham. I reckon that's enough about Kings Norton for now, and so let's move on to the next part of the video. Now that we've discussed each of the stations that are due to reopen along the Camp Hill line at the end of 2025, I reckon it to be a good idea to discuss any alternative proposals which have been put forward. So here goes. The first proposal which has been put forward is for Camp Hill line services to terminate at Birmingham Moor Street, rather than Birmingham New Street, as part of a wider package of improvements known as the Midlands Rail Hub. This is a plan that envisions the construction of 2 new chords from the Chiltern Main Line towards the Birmingham to Derby line and the Camp Hill line just outside of Bawdsley. The chords being established will allow services that would otherwise terminate at New Street to instead terminate at Moor Street, with the idea being that service frequencies would now be able to increase, due to the increase in terminating capacity made available at Birmingham Moor Street, enabled by the reopening of Platform 5. I'll cover this project in more detail in a later video perhaps, but whilst this idea has many upsides, there are a fair few downsides to this proposal. The most obvious negative is the demolition of Bawdsley Station that would need to ensue if the construction of the chords were to go ahead, and would mean that Birmingham City fans would be unable to alight outside Birmingham City's football ground just around the corner. However, this would likely be offset by the planned Midland Metro extension from Birmingham city centre to Digbeth, an area that is practically within spitting distance of the football ground, and so football fans could be directly transported from Moor Street to the ground with ease on match days. So, it's not the end of the world, I guess. The second proposal which has been put forward is for a station to reopen on the old site of Brighton Road. This idea has popped up on numerous occasions whenever plans to reopen stations along the Camp Hill line have been put forward, so I couldn't say it is the most surprising of suggestions. But what would a station reopening in Brighton Road actually mean? The old Brighton Road station is located in Balsall Heath, a reasonably populous area in inner city Birmingham, and reopening a station at Brighton Road would mean a station would now serve the areas of Balty Triangle and Balsall Heath. However, as I'll touch on in the next part of this video, I'm not so sure that reopening a station at Brighton Road would be the most effective use of resources, as the proposed half-hourly frequency from Brighton Road may be slightly off-putting to those wishing to travel into the city centre, and given the number of alternative bus routes that would take passengers into the city centre at much more frequent intervals, I just can't see that many people using the station, but I could be proved wrong, and I'm not too sure. Now that we've covered alternative proposals involving the Camp Hill line, I reckon now would be a good time to discuss the benefits and possible negatives of reopening stations along the Camp Hill line. So here goes. The glaringly obvious benefits associated with the reopening of the Camp Hill line stations are that congestion along the Ulster Road could decrease, which in turn would reduce carbon emissions as fewer people would be incentivised to drive into Birmingham. These two benefits are important to discuss, as the Ulster Road is a major road linking up Warwickshire, Worcestershire and Gloucestershire with Birmingham, which means that it sees a high volume of cars during rush hour, and honestly, it's no wonder that it is one of the most congested roads radiating out of the city. Therefore, it is imperative that the Camp Hill line is seen as a viable alternative for suburb-to-suburb journeys and journeys to and from Birmingham city centre. This means fewer people would be incentivised to use a car, meaning more people would be swayed towards using environmentally friendly methods of transport. But I think it would be worth also pointing out the facilities that are being constructed in each of the new stations. Each of the new stations is to be built with 2 platforms, lifts so that each station is step-free, secure bike parking and information points for those who require extra assistance during the journey. I hope that the addition of bike parking at each station will incentivise more local journeys to and from each of the stations to be made by bike rather than by car. But equally, I hope that the projected 25% drop in traffic congestion up the Ulster Road comes to fruition, as it will massively benefit the communities living along the Ulster Road, particularly for those who suffer from respiratory problems such as asthma. But it would be wrong not to highlight the possible negatives of the project to keep this balanced. The first concern I have about the Camp Hill line is what the new services will mean for the existing cross-city line services moving forward. Both the Redditch to Lichfield Trent Valley and Bromsgrove to Four Oaks services saw reductions in their respective frequencies back in 2020, from every 20 minutes to every 30 minutes on each branch, which has meant that the core between Alvechurch and Four Oaks saw 4 trains an hour rather than 6 trains an hour previously. This wasn't entirely related to the possible introduction of new Camp Hill line services, and was likely in response to dwindling passenger numbers during the pandemic, but given Camp Hill line services will need to cross a flat junction shared with cross-city line services to terminate at Kings Norton, this means that there is little headroom for both cross-city and Camp Hill line services to be increased in frequency, which brings me nicely onto my second concern about the Camp Hill line, which is the frequency. A half-hourly frequency is certainly not something to turn your nose up at, and is fairly standard across many parts of the UK, but for a railway that passes through so many populous residential areas, surely there should be aspirations to increase the frequency, say, to every 20 minutes? It would be wishful thinking, but I do think that the railway might be slightly underwhelming at every 30 minutes and might not be quite so attractive to potential users of the railway as a result, and may not resolve congestion along the Ulster Road as well as some people may think. My third and final concern relating to the Camp Hill line is that there are no electrification plans for the railway, despite stations reopening along the line with new passenger services. Unfortunately, there is no easy fix to this, given the cutting which Mosley station was initially constructed in prevents overhead wires from being installed, which severely limits the likelihood of the Camp Hill line using electric multiple units rather than Class 196s. It does seem rather retrograde that the line would use diesel rolling stock rather than electric rolling stock, particularly given the benefits of reduced congestion and lower carbon emissions as a result of these stations reopening. You could argue that a solution to this would be third railing the Camp Hill line, but with new installations of third rail largely frowned upon, it is unlikely that without altering the cutting, the Camp Hill line will most likely be using diesel multiple units for the foreseeable future, but there is always the possibility that battery multiple units could be deployed instead, so I suppose that could be investigated. Now that we've discussed the Camp Hill line in great detail, it would be wrong for me not to discuss whether I believe the project will truly be a success. My answer is, I think the project will be a success, and despite my reservations about certain bits of it, I'm sure it will be popular locally and will help decongest roads, relieve overcrowding on bus routes such as the 50 and support the popular cross-city line for journeys made to Bourneville and Kings Norton. But as could be said for most public transport projects which have been suggested across the country, just to what extent could these aims be achieved? I'm not entirely sure myself, and we'll have to wait and see. But I'm sure many people living along the Ulster Road will be excited to see this long overdue but equally welcome project opening later on this year, provided the opening date doesn't get pushed back once again. But we can only hope. Anyway, this is now where the video will draw to a close, so thank you all for watching this video. If you've liked this video, make sure to give this video a like, subscribe to my channel and share this video. Doing these 3 things massively helps me out and I really appreciate you doing so. Now tell me, what do you think about the plans associated with the Camp Hill line? What are your thoughts on the project, and where do you believe the project could be improved? Please let me know down in the comments section below, as I really enjoy reading what you all have to say. Anyway, that's it from me folks, take care of yourselves, and see you in the next video.